It was rotten. It was deliberate. It was corruption wearing a badge and carrying a city seal. Not petty bribery. Not some disgruntled officer. This was a coordinated infection that had metastasized deep into the arteries of public power. What the FBI and DEA found wasn't tucked away in a suburban garage. It wasn't inside a cartel safe house or an abandoned trailer. It was in the desk drawer of a senior official inside New York City Hall. 15 kilograms of fentanyl. Enough to end millions of lives. Hidden beneath folders labeled housing grant allocations and public safety reform. At 5:14 a.m., heavy boots moved with exact rhythm through the corridors of government. The marble echoed like a drum under federal weight. Agents didn't hesitate. They knew what was behind that door, the mayor's executive office, where security was tight, where cameras tracked every visitor, where policies were drafted to protect the vulnerable, was breached. Not gently, not diplomatically. The door was rammed off its hinges. Papers exploded into the air. A frame, awarded for distinguished public service, hit the floor and cracked. And in the middle of the room, frozen like a man already condemned, stood Adrian Cortez. He had been the mayor's most trusted advisor. 7 years of briefings, travel, negotiations. He'd helped write crime reduction plans. He'd given televised interviews on public health. Now he was silent, hands limp at his sides. Agents opened the drawer. Inside, 15 kilograms of fentanyl, triple wrapped, marked with coded tags, a loaded Colt 1911 with a hair trigger, an unmarked envelope with thick stacks of $100 bills, some still in bank straps. No confrontation, no fake confusion, no rehearsed explanations. The illusion shattered. Because this wasn't just a breach of ethics. This was an inside operation, run by a man who had His name wasn't Adrian Cortez, not originally. He was born Adrian Salazar, son of Arturo El Cardenal Salazar, an old-school trafficker whose name still haunted case files in New York, Jersey, and Philly. Arturo had gone underground, but his methods lived on. Adrian didn't just lie. He rebranded himself. He filed a legal name change during his second year at Columbia, graduated with honors, joined think tanks, attended fundraisers, talked about clean streets, youth empowerment, mental health initiatives. Nobody questioned his past. They didn't look. They only saw what he let them see. But the laptop changed everything. It wasn't arrogance. It was calculation. Agents expected burner accounts, VPNs, maybe a few encrypted chat threads. What they found instead was an operational archive. Spreadsheets, movement logs, audio memos. Every transaction disguised. Community development funds equals bribes. Urban renewal donations equals payment routes. Consulting fees equals laundering shells. Every donation arrived before an appointment or promotion. Adrian didn't infiltrate City Hall. He purchased it, corridor by corridor. Because once you hold the keys to access, you don't need to break in. You become the door. And while overdose numbers surged, while mothers clutched photos at candlelight vigils, Adrian Salazar sat in polished rooms, writing memos about opioid awareness. $180 million in narcotics, fentanyl, heroin, cocaine, moved annually through this hidden structure under his coordination. Hospital ERs overflowed. Shootings linked to turf control rose by 27% across Brooklyn, Queens, and parts of the Bronx. Over 3,400 overdose deaths in 6 years, all roads tracing back to the supply lines once ruled by his father, now digitalized by his son. And all the while, Adrian sat in city council meetings, speaking with a straight face about public trust and civic renewal. That wasn't irony, that was precision cruelty. This story never was about just one corrupt man. It's about a system engineered to wear a suit while it kills. Chaos never stays abstract. It breathes, it burns, it bleeds. Inside the freezing warehouse, gunfire cracked through the smoke and echoed off steel beams. Sirens bled into the air. Agents shouted over the noise, boots pounding concrete slick with ice and fuel. The assault that began in silence had become a storm. Sergeant Elias Grant, 32 years old, tactical unit leader, moved through it like muscle memory. Years of raids had conditioned him for everything except the instant when a fleeing suspect broke from cover. Grant didn't think. He shoved the man down and turned his body into a shield. The gunshot came a split second later. A ground tore through his shoulder. The impact spun him sideways, dropping him hard against the cold floor. Blood spread across his sleeve in quick pulses. His breath shortened, vision narrowing. But the radio in his hand stayed steady. His voice never cracked. That steadiness, the calm tone in the chaos, was what held the perimeter together. "Target zone secure. Push forward," he said. Medics rushed in under cover fire. Agents advanced down the aisles. Flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across crates marked produce. Only they weren't full of fruit. 2,500 pounds of vacuum-sealed cocaine lay hidden beneath decoy shipments. Plastic-wrapped, coded, cataloged. Next to them, a rack of imported rifles, oil-coated, serial numbers burned away. Every exit sealed. No suspects escaped, no routes left open. At 4:19 a.m., the next front opened. Midtown, glass-walled offices 22 stories up. What looked like a legitimate consulting firm for municipal projects was, in truth, a laundering hub for the same network. Here, it wasn't gunfire that complicated the mission. It was hostages. A UH-60 Blackhawk hovered above the skyscraper, rotor wash rattling the night. Floodlights sliced across reflective windows. Inside, tactical teams climbed the narrow side stairwell, inch by inch. On the 22nd floor, the scene froze into a tableau of fear. A gunman pressed a weapon to a courier's temple. His hands trembled, but his fingers stayed tight on the trigger. The hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound. Then, a scream from the hallway. A flash grenade burst white light across the corridor. A single second of misdirection, but enough. Agents surged. One slammed into the gunman, driving him to the floor. Another pulled the hostage back, wrapping her in body armor, shielding her from the debris and smoke. She was shaking violently, but alive. By 4:52 a.m., another door broke open, this time in Yonkers. A private gambling den, no windows, no signage. A steel entrance disguised as a supply closet. The first strike hit the lock. The second tore through the hinges. The third opened the truth. Inside, piles of unregistered poker chips, cash counters running hot, ledgers listing city employee payouts. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke, whiskey, and resignation. Nobody ran, nobody shouted. They all understood. The empire was collapsing, one room at a time. By sunrise, 1,240 suspects were in custody. Thousands of encrypted phone records seized. Dozens of operational hubs dismantled. But victory didn't feel clean. It never does. Because power does not fall quietly. It fights, it wounds, it scars. Agents bled. Neighborhoods shook. The sound of gunfire was replaced by the sound of ambulances. But discipline held. The city had learned the real price of dismantling an empire built inside its own government. When dawn finally broke, the raids weren't headlines. They were fault lines, exposing fractures that had always been there, hidden beneath civic pride and polished marble. At the Federal Analysis Center in Manhattan, evidence covered every wall. Not chaos, patterns. Photographs, ledgers, port records, shell company registrations, donation receipts, payroll logs. Each item pinned and connected by red thread. Piece by piece, agents began to stitch together the anatomy of corruption. And when the final pin was driven into the board, the shape that emerged was not a gang network. It was a map of power. The scope widened. What started with a single drawer in Adrian Cortez's office now pointed to refrigerated depots in Queens, truck corridors through New Jersey, midnight offloading zones at Yonkers freight yards, and conference rooms where men in suits signed contracts that looked clean on paper, but dripped with complicity. The real break came from a simple spreadsheet, recovered during the Yonkers raid. It wasn't encrypted, it wasn't hidden. It was left in plain sight, because no one believed they'd ever be exposed. Line after line, the spreadsheet laid it bare. Payments masked under layers of bureaucratic language, security retainers, consulting contracts, urban development budgeting. At a glance, everything appeared legitimate, but together, the pattern screamed. This was not administration. This was automation of corruption. Names surfaced, not from mugshots or wanted lists, but from city payrolls. A procurement officer with decades of clean evaluations. 3 housing clerks whose job was to verify tenants' eligibility. A deputy sheriff whose signature authorized warrant service. 2 transit supervisors with control over the city's surveillance grid. And a parole officer whose stroke of a pen removed travel bans for people who were never supposed to walk free. The deeper federal analysts drilled, the clearer the structure became. This wasn't some messy backroom operation. It was a legal organism, a bureaucracy sharpened into a weapon, an empire engineered entirely on paperwork, contracts, approvals, memos, grants. And when the sun came up that morning, New York didn't wake up to a scandal. It woke up to a battlefield. Because the war hadn't been fought in alleys or on corners. It had been fought and lost in the offices above them. This was not a cartel lurking in the shadows. This was a cartel woven into public life, cell by cell, desk by desk. What once wore ski masks now wore ID badges. What once hid encoded texts now flowed through procurement requests and budget line items. It didn't hide in darkness. It hid in routine. A donation to a local development project. A grant awarded to a community outreach program. A vendor contract signed on a quiet Thursday at 4:58 p.m. Each one, on its own, meaningless. Together, they formed a machine. And when that machine was finally hit, when the raids began, when safes were emptied, when cocaine stockpiles were incinerated and wire rooms were taken offline, the system didn't collapse instantly. It shuddered. Across 4 states, panic rippled in silence. Phones rang in the early hours. Secure calendars were wiped clean. Meetings scheduled for weeks were canceled without explanation. Engines started before dawn and drove without headlights through side streets. Some fled. Most didn't. Because the empire believed it was untouchable, too connected to fail, too institutionalized to collapse. It was wrong. Over the following 21 days, federal operations continued in waves. Each raid more surgical, each takedown closer to the inner sanctum. 5,000 individuals arrested across 4 states: New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut. 312 government employees, from junior clerks to deputy commissioners, suspended or criminally charged. Dozens of nonprofit boards forcibly dissolved. Shell company accounts in Delaware, Puerto Rico, and Panama frozen. Estimated $1.1 billion per year in revenue severed, not from street dealers, but from administrative networks. When the report reached the governor's desk, the room didn't stir. No applause, no commentary. Just a cold silence so total it felt like grief. Because the truth was no longer just political, it was personal. New York hadn't been infiltrated. New York had been hosting its enemy. And now came the hardest question of all. How do you rebuild trust when betrayal came from within? How do you restore legitimacy after the system itself enabled the crime? There were no speeches strong enough. No prosecutions fast enough. The answer wasn't found in the courtroom. It would be found in what the city chose to do next. And while the raids had ended, the damage remained. In the records, in the silence, in the shaking hands of those who once believed they were protected. The war had played out in warehouses, alleyways, elevator shafts, conference rooms. But the aftermath began in chambers with microphones and neckties. When the smoke cleared, no one cheered. New York did not celebrate. It exhaled. One long, exhausted breath that sounded like disbelief. At City Hall, the press flooded the briefing room. Shoulder to shoulder, lights bright. But when the mayor stepped forward, he came alone. No aides, no body language choreography, no speechwriter. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn tight. his shoulders low. The posture of a man who had stopped pretending things could be explained. For 7 years, he had trusted Adrian Cortez. 7 years of daily security briefings, of whispered conversations in government cars just before dawn. 7 years of public appearances, shared microphones at town halls, candlelight vigils after shootings, holiday visits to children's hospitals. 7 years of belief. That loyalty was earned through shared hours, long nights, hard decisions. 7 years. And not once did he see the man behind the mask. He didn't see the mechanism. He didn't see the inheritance of criminal legacy camouflaged beneath a pressed suit. He didn't see the monster he had helped carry into the center of power. But when trust dies, it does not explode. It hardens. And what remains is something colder than anger. The mayor stood alone at the podium. No flurry of aides, no backdrop of smiling staff. Just a man who had lost the thing every leader fears losing, the public's belief. He didn't deflect. He didn't rage. He didn't even raise his voice. His words were quiet, but sharp as glass. If the badge is used to harm the people, then the shield is broken. And when the shield is broken, we do not hide it. We repair it, in the open. The city didn't listen for sound bites. They listened for responsibility. What followed wasn't a press event. It was an incision. He announced the formation of the Public Integrity Reconstruction Task Force, an autonomous, fully empowered body with access to every level of municipal structure. Not a committee, not an advisory group. This was surgical oversight, deep audits into police units, procurement chains, nonprofit allocations, communications between city and federal agencies. A full autopsy on every place where the infection might still be hiding. This was not reform. This was reconstruction. For many New Yorkers, especially the elders, the betrayal cut deeper than any graph of overdoses or criminal indictments. They remembered a time when a uniform meant protection, when the city seal on a document meant truth, when a public official's word meant service, not calculation. They watched the coverage in silence, in kitchens, on radios, in community halls. Some cried. Most simply lowered their eyes. In Queens, an elderly man planted a small American flag outside his building. His son had died of an overdose 5 years earlier. He looked at the flag, not the cameras, and whispered to no one in particular. So that's where it came from. In Brooklyn, a retired school teacher told a local reporter, "We trusted them because we needed to, and they used that trust to poison our children." This wasn't outrage. This was grief, slow, private, suffocating. Churches held community gatherings. Senior centers pulled chairs into circles. Neighborhood associations issued quiet but firm demands. They did not ask for vengeance. They asked for truth. What would real accountability look like? Who would audit the auditors? Who would watch the hands that once signed off on silence? The mayor ended his address with a vow. Not theatrical, not even hopeful. A vow that sounded more like a man assigning himself a lifelong sentence. We will stand this city back up, slowly, carefully, truthfully, and with both eyes open. Because corruption doesn't vanish when the sirens fade. And trust must be earned again, one honest act at a time. The raids had ended the empire, but the rebuilding, that would be the real war. A war fought not with guns or warrants, but with policies, oversight, and the patience of a wounded city. When the sun finally rose above New York, the headlines called it a scandal. Some called it a takedown, others, a historic operation. But for the people who lived inside it, for the mothers who buried their sons, for the officers who walked into buildings knowing they might not walk out, for the agents who chased signatures across oceans of paperwork, this wasn't a story. It was a warning. Because corruption doesn't always wear a ski mask or burst through windows. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it sits at ribbon cuttings. Sometimes it signs proclamations and takes photographs with school children. Sometimes it builds its empire from within the very walls meant to protect you. And that is why vigilance must never sleep. Not just from law enforcement, not just from elected officials, from all of us. Because when the network tried to rewrite a city from the inside out, it wasn't brute force that stopped it. It was men and women who refused to look away, agents who moved through the dark without backup, medics who ran toward gunfire, analysts who saw patterns no one else saw, officers who bled but did not break. They didn't just defend a city. They defended the very idea that the city could still be worth saving. That is what was almost lost.
That is what must never be forgotten.